About a year ago, I made a video showcasing how I capture candid, authentic, movement-filled self-portraits by utilizing my camera's built-in intervalometer combined with the incredible autofocus found in mirrorless cameras. That video has since become one of my more popular videos, which is awesome because a lot of you have learned a really easy technique to take incredible self-portraits, and that's fantastic. However, I've also become aware that this method doesn't work on Sony cameras. So essentially on Sony cameras, when you enable the intervalometer, which is the tool that I use to take photos every second or two, this disables autofocus. I'm guessing Sony did this because intervalometers are typically used for time lapses, and when you're shooting time lapses, you want to disable the autofocus, and so Sony didn't really expect that you'd be using the intervalometer for anything other than the time lapse, and so they said, hey, we'll make it easy on you. When you turn the intervalometer on, we'll automatically turn the autofocus off for you, which is great for time lapses, but really sucks when you're trying to shoot self-portraits. That being said, I have a solution for you, and it's actually pretty simple. The solution is this, another intervalometer, except for this one plugs into your camera. So this intervalometer is what photographers have used for decades to trigger the shutter on their cameras externally. This is what people used for time lapses before intervalometers were built into cameras. And what this does is this basically just plugs into the little multifunction port on your Sony camera and then will trigger the shutter at whatever interval you choose and for however many images you do. Basically, this just bypasses the intervalometer that's built into the camera. Now you're doing it externally. Now I picked this one up for like $24 on Amazon. I will link this one down in the description. It's cheap, it works fantastically well, and it works on most Sony cameras from what I'm aware of. So what you're doing with this intervalometer is basically just bypassing the internal intervalometer on the camera. And what this intervalometer is doing is just sending a signal to the Sony camera to just press the shutter button. So what the camera senses is you're sitting here tapping away at the shutter button, even though you're not actually doing that. That's what the intervalometer is doing. And because you're triggering the shutter button externally and independently, it actually allows you to keep all of your autofocus, eye tracking, person detection, all that kind of stuff enabled. Now, I'm not going to dive into all the details that I talked about in my previous video, like composition and how to move the tripod setup around and what you can do in front of the camera, all that. Check out that video if you want to have more details on that. I'll link that down in the description. But what I want to do here is just tell you how I set up this intervalometer on Sony cameras to work for self-portraits. So right out of the box, you turn this thing on, it's basically ready to go. And then there's three specific settings we're going to want to set up. Setting number one is the self timer. Now the self timer is basically just a delay built into the intervalometer that just delays the interval starting to shoot for a number of seconds. Personally, I usually set this to 5 seconds. That just gives me enough time to press go and walk out to the spot where I'm going to start posing for my self-portraits. That just means I don't have any wasted photos at the beginning because I'm giving myself 5 seconds to get out to where I'm shooting. The second setting that we're going to set up on this intervalometer is the interval itself. Now I talk all about this in my other video, but my recommendation when you're shooting self-portraits with an intervalometer is to set the interval to about 2 seconds, maybe 1 second if you're going to be moving around a lot. If you want to do a few more static poses and you don't want to move around a lot, or you're posing with another person, 2 seconds kind of gives you enough time to move in between shutter clicks. If you're just posing yourself and you want to do a lot of movement and action and all that, 1 second can be a great option. You just kind of have to play around with it and decide, but usually a 1 second or a 2 second interval works perfectly for my needs. And the final setting that we're going to set on this intervalometer is the number of images to take. Basically, this intervalometer can count how many images you want it to fire before it stops triggering the camera. But my recommendation here is usually around 30 to 40 photos. Usually when I'm shooting individual portraits of myself, I recommend shooting about 30 images before it stops triggering the camera, and then I come back, review the images, and start again. If I'm shooting photos with my wife, I might set it to 40 images just to give us a little bit more time to move around and all that kind of stuff. And if I'm shooting photos with my family, I might set it to 50 images just because my kid might not be looking at the camera, or we might want to do some stuff with him. But really anywhere between like 30 and 50 images is about my ideal number of images to use before you stop. And obviously you can start this again once it stops. I just try to build in pauses so I can come back, review the images that I've captured, see what I like, see if I want to do something different, or if I want to move the tripod, recompose, zoom the lens in, anything like that. So for all of my Sony users, that's how I use an intervalometer to take some creative, fun, movement-filled self-portraits with my camera. I really genuinely do wish that the intervalometer function in Sony cameras allowed for autofocus, because it would mean one less tool that I had to carry around with me. But hey, for $24 US, that's really not a bad option, and it really unlocks a world of possibility in the self-portrait world. So hopefully that's been a helpful look at this process. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave those down below. And if you want to watch my other video where I share a lot more tips and tricks on this process, feel free to click that right here or wherever that goes, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.